The restaurant was the kind of place where people came to be seen. High ceilings, candlelight that caught every carefully chosen outfit, and a silence between conversations that felt more like judgment than peace. Darian Mercer stood near the entrance of Leora House, adjusting the cuff of his jacket and already regretting saying yes to this. His best friend Bennett had called it just a dinner. Darian had called it a mistake. He was still deciding who was right when the door opened. Celeste Marlowe walked in. The room didn't stop. It just shifted. Forks hovered a half-second too long. Eyes moved without moving heads. Someone near the window leaned toward their companion and said something behind a raised hand. It was the kind of attention that wasn't admiration. It was assessment. The kind Celeste had learned to walk through like weather. She kept her chin level. Her hand tightened around her clutch. Darian watched all of it. Every flicker, every glance, every small cruelty dressed up as nothing. Then he stood up, pulled out her chair, and said the only honest thing he'd felt all evening. "You're right on time. I just worked up the nerve to stop myself from leaving." Celeste looked at him, and for the first time that night, she almost smiled. If stories like this one stay with you, the quiet kind, about dignity and the way one person can change the temperature of a room, subscribe to this channel. There's more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be here for it. Darian Mercer had not always been the kind of man who second-guessed himself at restaurant doors. There was a version of him, younger, easier in his own skin, less careful, who would have walked into a room like Leora House without a second thought. That version had believed in the kind of things people stopped believing in after life got specific. That love was simple, that good intentions were enough, that a family you built with your hands wouldn't come apart in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon. That version of Darian had been married to Lenora. Now he was 34, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the east side of the city, raising an 8-year-old daughter named Zadie, who had strong opinions about everything from breakfast cereal to the constitutional rights of stuffed animals. He worked as an urban infrastructure engineer for the city, overseeing projects that kept roads from sinking and drainage systems from turning neighborhoods into lakes. It was not glamorous work. It was necessary work. Darian had made peace with the difference. His life had a shape to it. Work, school pickup, dinner, usually something he could make in under 40 minutes. Helping Zadie with homework at the kitchen table while she narrated her day in the specific, breathless way children do when they haven't yet learned to summarize. Bedtime, which was never really bedtime because Zadie always had one more question, one more observation, one more reason to delay turning off the light. Then quiet. The particular quiet of a man alone in a small apartment after his child has finally fallen asleep. The kind of quiet that isn't restful so much as it is just empty. He didn't complain about any of it. Zadie was the best thing in his life without qualification. But Bennett Shaw, his closest friend since college, had been watching Darian move through that emptiness for 2 years and had finally decided to do something about it. "It's one dinner," Bennett had said on the phone. "You sit across from a woman, you eat food, you talk. Maybe you like each other, maybe you don't. But you stop using Zadie as a reason not to show up for yourself." Darian had started to object. Bennett had put his wife Maribel on the phone. Maribel had said 6 words. "Darian, she is worth your time." And something in the way Maribel said it, not like she was selling anything, but like she genuinely believed it, made him stop arguing. So here he was, Leora House, a Tuesday night, waiting for a woman he'd never met. He did not know that Celeste Marlowe was the CEO of Marlowe Meridian Group, one of the more formidable investment firms in the region. He did not know that her name appeared in financial publications with words like decisive and visionary and occasionally difficult, the last of which was almost always applied to women who simply refused to be managed. He did not know that she had nearly canceled this dinner 4 times, that she'd sat in her car outside the restaurant for 6 minutes before making herself walk in, or that the expression she wore as she moved through the room, composed, chin up, gaze forward, had taken years to build and cost more than anyone looking at her would ever guess. What he saw was a woman walking into a room that had already decided something about her before she reached her table. He'd grown up understanding that kind of room, the way a space could communicate its verdict without saying a word. He'd felt it himself, had learned early what it meant to walk into certain places and feel the temperature drop slightly, to understand that you were being evaluated and that the evaluation had started before you opened your mouth. He had developed his own version of Celeste's composure, his own way of moving through those rooms with his face arranged in a way that gave nothing away. So he recognized it in her immediately. The slight tightening at the corner of her mouth, the fingers closing a fraction more tightly around the clutch. The way her eyes swept the room not with curiosity but with the practiced efficiency of someone checking for threats. He stood up. It was not a dramatic gesture. He didn't cross the room or make a scene. He simply rose from his chair as she approached the table, pulled out the seat across from him, and said what he said. She sat down. She looked at him the way people look at something unexpected. Not with suspicion exactly, but with the careful attention of someone trying to determine whether it's real. "Darian," he said, extending his hand. "Celeste," she said, and shook it. Her grip was firm, direct, no performance in it. "Bennett told me almost nothing about you," Darian said. "I think that was strategic. Maribel told me the same about you." A pause. "I think she was trying to keep us from talking ourselves out of this before we got here." "Did it almost work?" Celeste set her clutch on the table. "I sat in my car for 6 minutes. I almost asked the hostess to tell you I'd had a family emergency." She looked at him again, and this time the almost smile became an actual one. Small, real, not the kind she kept ready for boardrooms and galas. The kind that happened before she could stop it. They ordered, they talked. Not in the cautious, resume-exchanging way of people who have been set up and are trying to seem interesting, but in the way of two people who have both been alone long enough to recognize someone else who is tired of performing. Celeste asked about his work. He explained it in plain language, without apology for its unglamour. She listened the way people listen when they're actually thinking about what they're hearing, not just waiting for their turn. She asked a follow-up question about load distribution in aging infrastructure that told him she wasn't just being polite. He asked about her company. She answered briefly, then said, "People usually want to know how much it's worth. You didn't ask that. I didn't think it was relevant to whether or not I like talking to you." She studied him for a moment. "Most people find it very relevant. Most people are doing math I'm not interested in." The dinner moved. The food was good. The conversation had that rare quality of feeling both easy and substantive, like they had skipped several layers of small talk without it being forced. And then Corbin Vale happened. He was seated 2 tables over with a group of men in suits, the kind of men who spoke at a volume that assumed the room wanted to hear them. Darian had clocked him when he walked in. Mid-40s, the particular confidence of someone who had never been told no in a way that stuck. Corbin knew Bennett peripherally, had been waved over during a brief exchange earlier in the evening, and had apparently taken that as an invitation to insert himself. He stopped by their table on his way back from the bar. His eyes moved over Celeste in the way certain men look at women they've already categorized. Quick, conclusive, just barely concealed. "Celeste Marlowe," he said, as though announcing her. "I didn't realize you were here tonight. You look—" A small pause that carried a great deal. "Confident, as always." "Corbin," Celeste said. Her voice was perfectly level. She had clearly handled Corbin Vales before. "It takes a certain kind of person," he continued, pulling out the empty chair beside their table as though he'd been invited, "to walk into a room like this and really own it. Not everyone can do that." His tone was the particular tone of someone who believes they are being generous. "The whole presence thing, the way you dress. It's all very—" "Corbin." Darian's voice was quiet. Not aggressive, just done. Corbin looked at him, reassessing. "I'm going to ask you not to finish that sentence," Darian said. "And the one before it. Because what you're calling a compliment is something else, and I think you know that." A beat of silence. The kind that expands. "I'm just saying she carries herself well," Corbin said, with the smile of a man who believes that restating a thing makes it less offensive. "You've said that twice now," Darian replied, "in different ways, about her body. She's the most interesting person at this table, probably in this room. And you've spent 3 minutes not seeing that because you're too busy evaluating how she looks in it." He picked up his fork. "We're in the middle of dinner. Corbin left, not gracefully. The table was quiet for a moment. Celeste was looking at Darian with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between gratitude and wariness, as though she wasn't sure yet whether what had just happened was something she could trust. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. I've handled men like him my whole career." "I know that too." He met her eyes. "That's not why I said it." She looked down at her plate. When she looked up again, her expression had shifted. Not softened exactly, but opened in the way a window opens when someone finally unlocks it from inside. They finished dinner. They walked out into the night air together and stood on the sidewalk the way people do when neither of them is ready to say goodbye, but neither of them is sure what comes next. "I'm glad I didn't have the family emergency," Darian said. Celeste laughed, surprised, brief, genuine. "I'm glad I got out of the car." They said goodnight. He watched her walk to her car. He stood there a moment longer than necessary, hands in his jacket pockets, thinking that he had come to this dinner expecting to get through it, and instead had found himself at the beginning of something he couldn't quite name yet. He wasn't sure that was safe. He also wasn't sure he cared. The first text came 3 days later. Darian had not sent it. He'd thought about it, had picked up his phone twice, put it down, told himself he was being careful, and not just afraid. Then at 7:14 on a Thursday evening, while he was standing at the stove stirring pasta, and Zadie was at the kitchen table explaining to her stuffed bear Gerald why the legal system had failed him, his phone buzzed. "Zadie's bear. Does he have representation yet?" "I know people." Darian stared at the message for a moment. Then he laughed. The kind of laugh that comes out before you decide to let it. "He has a strong case," he typed back. "Wrongful seizure of a chew toy. Precedent setting. Tell him to document everything. Juries love a paper trail." That was how it started. Not with declarations or grand gestures, but with a stuffed bear's legal troubles and a running joke that somehow kept finding new material. They texted most evenings, not long, structured conversations, but the kind of back and forth that happens when two people have found a frequency that feels natural and are quietly surprised by it. 2 weeks after Leora House, they met at Rowan and Finch, a coffee shop on the west side that had mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and absolutely no interest in being fashionable. Celeste had suggested it, which surprised him. He'd expected her to name somewhere with a reservation list. "I have a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows," she said when he mentioned this. "Sometimes I just want to sit in a room that doesn't perform." He understood that completely. They sat across from each other with their coffee and talked for 3 hours without either of them noticing the time. Darian told her about Zadie. Really told her, not the edited version people give when they want to seem manageable, but the full version. The tonsil surgery when Zadie was 5 and how he'd held her hand through the whole recovery and read the same book about a stubborn cloud 11 times in 1 week, because it was the only thing that calmed her. The morning, 8 months after the divorce, when Zadie had climbed into his bed at 4 a.m. and said, very matter-of-factly, "Daddy, I think you're sad. I think we should get a plant." They had gotten a plant. It had died within 3 weeks. Zadie had held a small funeral. Celeste laughed at that, genuinely, fully, with her whole face. Then she told him about her mother. Margaret Marlowe had built the foundation of what would become Marlowe Meridian Group from a single regional fund, had raised Celeste alone after her father left when Celeste was 11, and had spent the last decade of her life preparing her daughter to take over something larger than either of them had originally imagined. She had also spent much of that time teaching Celeste, not cruelly, but with the particular pragmatism of a woman who had survived by being twice as prepared as everyone else, that the world would give her fewer second chances than her male counterparts, and that every room she entered, she needed to enter ready. "She died 4 years ago," Celeste said, "and I still walk into boardrooms the way she taught me to, shoulders back, face arranged, ready for the room to push back." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I've been doing it so long I sometimes forget it's a posture and not just how I am." Darian didn't offer her a platitude. He sat with what she'd said for a moment, the way you sit with something that deserves the space. "My dad used to tell me that the most dangerous thing a person can do is start performing themselves and forget they're performing," he said. Took me a long time to understand what he meant. Did you figure it out? I'm still figuring it out. She looked at him across the small table. Me too, she said quietly. Me too. The weeks that followed had their own rhythm. Coffee at Rowan and Finch on Saturday mornings when Zadie was at her weekend art class. Evening texts that ranged from the genuinely funny to the unexpectedly honest. One night, Celeste sent him a photo of a spreadsheet with the caption, "This is what a panic attack looks like formatted as a Q3 projection." He'd called her immediately. They'd talked for an hour and a half. He hadn't tried to fix anything. He'd just stayed on the line. But the distance between them was real, even when they didn't name it. Darian felt it most on the evenings he drove home from Rowan and Finch, past the dry cleaner on the corner, past Zadie's school, past the pharmacy where he knew the owner by name, and tried to imagine Celeste in the context of his actual life. Not as a dinner companion or a voice on the phone, but as someone who might sit at his kitchen table and eat the pasta he made on Tuesdays and watch Zadie argue constitutional law with a stuffed bear. The images didn't quite connect, not because he didn't want them to, but because he understood, clearly and without self-pity, that his life and Celeste's life occupied different registers, different scales. He wasn't ashamed of what his life was. He'd built it deliberately, had chosen stability over ambition more than once because Zadie needed a father who came home at a predictable hour, not one chasing something at the expense of her consistency. But sitting across from a woman who ran a company with 78 employees, who moved through the world in a way that made rooms adjust to her presence, he sometimes felt the gap between their lives as a physical thing. Not insurmountable, just real. Celeste had her own version of the distance. She recognized what was happening between them. She was not naive about her own feelings, and she was honest enough with herself to admit that Darian Mercer was the most genuinely decent person she had encountered in years. Not decent in the way of someone performing goodness for an audience, but decent in the way of someone who had simply decided, at some point, that integrity was easier to maintain than the alternative. That was exactly what frightened her. Maribel had called one evening, not to check in but to say something specific. "He's the real thing, Celeste. But I need you to know that he's also been hurt in ways he doesn't advertise. He will not push. He will not perform. If you're not ready, tell him. Don't let him wait around the edges of something you're not going to let him into." Celeste had thanked her and hung up and sat in her apartment for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. She had her own therapist, Dr. Althea Voss, whom she saw every other Wednesday in a quiet office on the 4th floor of a building downtown. In the weeks she'd been seeing Darian, she'd brought him into the sessions not as a problem to be solved, but as a question she was still learning to sit with. "I keep looking for the thing underneath," she said one Wednesday. "The reason. The angle. Nobody is just kind without wanting something back." "Has he given you any evidence of an angle?" Dr. Voss asked. "No." "And how does that make you feel?" Celeste considered the question carefully, the way she considered everything. "Suspicious," she said, "which I know is its own problem." Dr. Voss didn't rush to fill the silence. "I was with someone for 2 years, Celeste continued, who told people he was embarrassed to be seen with me, not to my face. To mutual friends at a party I wasn't at. Someone told me 3 months later." She looked at her hands. "After that, I stopped. I just stopped assuming that the face someone shows you is the face they show the room when you're not there." "And Darian?" "Darian said something to a man he'd just met in a room full of people, because that man was being unkind to me. He didn't do it quietly. He didn't wait until we were alone and say, 'Oh, ignore him.' He just..." She stopped. "He just said the thing." "What does that tell you?" Celeste was quiet for a long moment. "That he's either exactly who he seems to be," she said, "or the longest con I've ever encountered." Dr. Voss smiled slightly. "And which do you think is more likely?" Celeste didn't answer, but she smiled too, just barely, in spite of herself. It was on a Saturday morning at Rowan and Finch, 6 weeks after Leora House, that Darian told her he wanted her to meet Zadie. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without a preamble designed to manage her reaction. "She's the center of my life. If this is going somewhere, I need those two things to be able to coexist." He paused. "I'm not asking you to be anything to her. I'm just asking if you're open to being in the same room." Celeste looked down at her coffee cup. She turned it slightly on the table. I don't have a lot of experience with children, she said. That's fine. Zadie has more than enough experience with everyone. A small laugh escaped her. Then it faded. What if she doesn't like me? Darian considered this seriously, the way he considered things. Then we'll figure that out. But I'll tell you what she doesn't like. People who pretend. She has very accurate radar for it. He looked at Celeste steadily. So I think you'll be fine. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. He wasn't reassuring her by minimizing the stakes. He was reassuring her by telling her the truth. Okay, she said. Yeah? Don't make it a bigger thing than it needs to be and I'll say yes. It's just the Natural History Museum, he said. She wants to look at rocks. Celeste nodded once. I can do rocks. What she hadn't anticipated was how much she would like it. The Harlan Museum of Natural History occupied a full city block and smelled, in the way of all such museums, of recycled air and old things and possibility. Zadie arrived in a yellow jacket with a backpack covered in stickers, holding Darian's hand and talking without pause about the volcanic rock exhibit she'd read about online. She stopped when she saw Celeste, looked up at her with the frank, unfiltered assessment that only children and very honest adults manage. You're pretty, Zadie said. Celeste blinked. Thank you. I'm Zadie. That's Gerald. She held up the stuffed bear slightly. He's my attorney. I've heard, Celeste said. He has a strong case. Zadie's eyes widened. Dad said you might know about that. She fell into step beside Celeste as they walked toward the entrance, apparently having decided that the preliminary evaluation was complete. Do you know about rocks too? A little. Mostly I know about what they're worth. Gerald says worth is subjective, Zadie said, with the authority of someone quoting a legal opinion. Gerald is right, Celeste said, and something in her chest, some small, tightly wound thing, loosened just slightly. They moved through the exhibits, the dinosaur hall, the ocean floor display, a corridor dedicated to gems and minerals where Zadie pressed her nose to every case. Darian walked beside Celeste, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed, not so close as to press anything she wasn't ready for. He was watching his daughter, mostly, but every so often he glanced over at Celeste with an expression that was quiet and undemanding and real. Celeste thought, this is what it looks like when someone is not performing. They reached the volcanic rock display. Zadie moved from specimen to specimen with focused intensity, reading the labels aloud and occasionally editorializing. A small basalt formation received particularly high praise. A piece of pumice was deemed interesting but not trustworthy, for reasons Zadie did not elaborate. And then Zadie looked up at Celeste. Celeste, she said, her pronunciation of the honorific still slightly soft. You're really tall and big. She tilted her head, studying her with open curiosity, not cruelty, not performance, pure observation. You kind of look like a mountain. The words landed, not loudly, not with malice. They landed the way a stone lands in still water, the initial contact barely a sound, and then the ripples moving outward and outward until they touched every edge. Celeste felt the blood leave her face. She felt, in the space of a single breath, every room she had ever walked into, every hand pressed to a mouth, every quiet laugh at a party she'd pretended not to hear. The ex-boyfriend's voice, third hand, saying I don't know how to explain her to people. The colleague who had said at a conference dinner that she was impressive, especially considering, and had not needed to finish the sentence. Every version of her body used as a qualifier, a footnote, a polite regret. Her hand tightened on the strap of her bag. She took one small, involuntary step back. Darian saw it. All of it. He saw the moment it happened, and he understood exactly what Zadie's words had touched, even if Zadie didn't. He crouched down to his daughter's level. Hey, he said gently. When you said Celeste looks like a mountain, what did you mean by that? Zadie looked at her father with the expression she wore when she didn't understand why a question was being asked. Mountains are the biggest things, she said, as though this were obvious. They're really tall and really wide, and they've been there forever, and nothing can knock them down. She glanced back at Celeste. And when you're near one, you feel safe. Like nothing bad can happen because the mountain is just there. She hugged Gerald against her chest and added with complete seriousness, Gerald says if he ever got into real trouble, he'd want someone like a mountain on his side, not someone small and easy to push around. The volcanic rock exhibit was very quiet. Zadie looked between the two adults, sensing something she couldn't name. Was that wrong? She asked her father, her voice dropping slightly. I thought it was a good thing. It is a good thing, Darian said. He put his hand on the back of her head briefly, gently. Go look at the obsidian case. The black one, third from the end. Read me the label. Zadie accepted this assignment and moved off with Gerald tucked under her arm, casting one last curious glance over her shoulder. Darian straightened and turned to Celeste. She was looking at a fixed point somewhere past the exhibit case, her jaw set, her breathing careful and controlled. The composure was back. The boardroom composure, the armor, the face that had been built over years of walking into rooms that required it. But her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the museum lighting. Celeste, he said quietly. I'm fine, she said. Automatic. Practiced. You don't have to be. She turned to look at him then, and something in the way he said it, not as a challenge, not as an invitation to perform vulnerability, just as a plain statement of fact, made the armor slip a fraction. She didn't mean anything by it, Celeste said. Her voice was even. She was managing it. I know she didn't. Children say what they see, that's... She stopped, pressed her lips together. That's fine. It's not fine, Darian said, still quiet. Not because of what Zadie said, but because of what it landed on. And you don't have to pretend that didn't happen. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. Somewhere down the corridor, Zadie's voice rose with genuine excitement over the obsidian case. The sound of it, bright and unself-conscious, moved through the air between them. I spent a long time, Celeste said slowly, learning not to react in rooms where people were waiting for me to react. She exhaled. I'm very good at it now. Sometimes I can't tell whether I'm being strong or whether I've just gotten very efficient at disappearing the parts of myself that are still hurt. Darian didn't say anything immediately. He was looking at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand fully before he spoke. Both can be true at the same time, he said finally. She looked at him. You can be genuinely strong and still have things that cut you. Those aren't contradictions. He held her gaze. And for what it's worth, Zadie was describing the thing she admires most in the world. She talks about mountains the way most kids talk about superheroes. Celeste looked down at the exhibit case in front of her. Inside it, a piece of volcanic rock sat under glass, dark, rough-surfaced, formed by pressure and heat, and the slow cooling of something that had once been violent. She thought about what Zadie had said. Nothing can knock them down. When you're near one, you feel safe. She thought about a version of herself that had never learned to hear those words without flinching. I was going to leave, she said. After she said it, I was already planning how to excuse myself. I know, Darian said. You couldn't have known that. I watched you take a step back. She was quiet. You didn't leave, he said. No, that matters. That evening, after the museum, the three of them found a diner near the park. Zadie ate an entire plate of pancakes and delivered a comprehensive dissertation on why maple syrup was scientifically superior to all other condiments, complete with supporting arguments from Gerald. Celeste listened to the full case and ruled in Zadie's favor on the grounds of overwhelming evidence. Zadie declared her the most qualified judge she had ever met. By the time they walked back to the cars, the sharp edge of the afternoon had softened into something warmer. But Celeste was still quieter than usual. Present, but working through something internally. Darian gave her the space without making the space feel like distance. When they reached her building, they stood on the sidewalk in the early evening light while the city moved around them. Celeste looked at him and said what she'd been turning over all day. I don't know if I fit here, Darian. He was still. What do you mean by here? Your life. She said it carefully, not cruelly. You and Zadie. You have something that's real and small and specific. And I don't mean small like it doesn't matter. I mean small like it has edges. It knows what it is. She looked at the building behind her. I'm not built for small things. I don't know how to be. I've always been too much of something for the spaces I was supposed to fit in, and eventually the space made that very clear. Darian was quiet for a moment. A cab moved past. Somewhere above them, a window opened. My life isn't small because it's lacking something, he said. It's been small because I stopped letting people in. He looked at her directly. Since the divorce, I've kept everything tight and manageable because that felt safer than letting someone in and watching Zadie get attached and then having to explain to an 8-year-old why that person is gone. He paused. You're the first person I've wanted to let pass that in 2 years. Celeste opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not asking you to shrink, he continued. I'm not asking you to be less than what you are. I'm saying that since you've been around, my life doesn't feel small to me anymore. It feels like it has room in it again. He held her gaze. That didn't happen by accident. She looked at him for a long time. The armor was gone now. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way it goes when someone has been wearing it so long that the weight of it becomes more exhausting than the thing it was meant to protect against. I'm tired, she said, not as a complaint, as an admission. I'm tired of walking into every room like I'm already defending myself against something. Then don't, he said. Not here, not with me. He took one step closer. You can put it down, not all at once, however much you're ready for, but you can put it down. Celeste had been told many things by many people over the years. She had been praised, flattered, courted, negotiated with, and underestimated, and occasionally surprised. She was not a woman who was easily moved by words. But there was something about the way Darian said things, without decoration, without strategy, without the slight performance of sincerity that most people didn't know they were doing, that bypassed every layer she had. She didn't cry. She was not, in that moment, a woman who cried on sidewalks. But her eyes went bright again, and she breathed in once, slowly, and when she breathed out, something shifted in her face. Not a collapse, but a release. Like a door that had been braced shut from the inside, finally allowed to simply rest on its frame. Okay, she said. Yeah? Don't make it a bigger thing than it needs to be. He smiled. It was the same thing she'd said to him at Rowan and Finch, and they both knew it. The weeks that followed were different, not perfect. Celeste still had mornings when the old instincts reasserted themselves, when she caught herself calculating how she looked walking beside him in public, waiting for the flicker of something in his face. It never came. She still arrived at sessions with Dr. Voss with new iterations of the same question. Is this real? How do I know it's real? What am I missing? Dr. Voss continued to ask her what the evidence showed, and the evidence continued to show nothing except a man who did what he said he would do. Darian had his own adjustments. Celeste's world had a scale to it that required him to step into spaces where he was sometimes the only person in the room who drove a 10-year-old car and didn't have an opinion on private equity. He went anyway. He didn't perform comfort he didn't feel, but he also didn't shrink. He showed up as himself, the engineer, the father, the man who asked direct questions and didn't fill silence with noise, and found more often than not that this was sufficient. Zadie, for her part, had decided that Celeste was one of the more interesting people her father had ever introduced into their orbit. They had a standing rock consultation, which meant that whenever Zadie encountered a new mineral specimen at school or in a book, she sent Celeste a photo, and Celeste replied with its approximate market value and a one-sentence editorial. Gerald had apparently promoted Celeste to senior legal counsel, a development that Zadie announced at breakfast one Tuesday with full ceremonial gravity. Darian had looked at his daughter across the kitchen table and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not contentment exactly, but something wider than contentment. Like the walls of a room had been quietly moved outward while he wasn't watching. 3 months after Leora House, Bennett and Maribel hosted a fundraising gala for a local youth education nonprofit they supported every year. It was the kind of event Celeste attended routinely. The right cause, the right crowd, the right venue. The kind of event where she knew, from long experience, exactly how the room would receive her. She arrived with Darian and Zadie, who had been permitted to attend the early portion before being collected by Maribel's mother for a sleepover. Zadie was wearing a dress with small yellow flowers and had Gerald in her tote bag, visible from the zipper up. She walked into the gala the way she walked into every room, as though she had already assessed it and found it acceptable. Celeste walked in beside Darian. The room moved in the way rooms move. Heads turned, eyes assessed. Someone near the bar said something to their companion with a look that carried the specific freight of opinion. Celeste felt it. She always felt it. But something was different tonight, and it took her a moment to identify what. Darian's hand was at the small of her back, not possessively, not as a statement, just there, natural, unhurried. His hand resting at her back the way a person's hand rests against something they are not afraid to be seen touching. He didn't scan the room to gauge reactions. He didn't reposition himself. He spoke to people they encountered with the same direct ease he brought to every conversation. And when he introduced her, it was with a simple, uncomplicated pride. Not the pride of a man showing something off, but the pride of a man who is glad to be standing where he is standing. Partway through the evening, Zadie found Celeste near the dessert table, having completed her approved social obligations and now focused entirely on the task of selecting the ideal item before her departure. "Celeste," she said with the gravity of professional advice, "you should eat something before it gets too busy in your head." Celeste looked at her. "Is it busy in my head?" Zadie studied her with the frank evaluation she brought to everything. "You looked a little like you were carrying something heavy when we came in." She selected a small chocolate thing from the table and held it out. "Mountains need fuel." Celeste took it. She looked at this child, this small, particular, fully formed person who had decided without any deliberation that Celeste was worth the good version of the comparison, and laughed. Not a boardroom laugh, not a gala laugh. The real one. The one that came up before she could organize it. The one she had been releasing more frequently in recent months and was slowly learning not to reach for the mute button on. Darian was watching from across the room. He saw it. The laugh. The way Celeste bent slightly toward Zadie. The way his daughter offered something from her hand with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone who had never learned to ration her affection. He saw Celeste receive it. He saw in Celeste's face the particular expression of a person who is realizing, possibly for the first time in a long time, that being seen doesn't have to mean being evaluated. He thought about the night at Leora House. The way the room had shifted when she walked in, the way she had carried it, chin up, hand tightening on the clutch, all the weight of other people's assessments absorbed and concealed and processed alone. He had not rescued her from any of that. He understood this clearly. Celeste Marlowe did not need rescuing. What she had needed, what perhaps everyone needs, under the right circumstances, was simply to be treated as someone for whom it was obvious. Obvious that she was worth the chair pulled out. Obvious that she was worth defending in a room of people who hadn't decided that yet. Obvious that she was worth knowing fully without requiring her to make herself smaller or harder or more palatable. He had not done anything extraordinary. He had only done the thing that should have been ordinary all along. They left the gala late, after Zadie had been collected and the crowd had thinned and the city outside had settled into its nighttime register. They walked to the car together, and Darian held her hand on the sidewalk the way he'd placed his hand at her back inside. Naturally, without announcement, as though it were simply the position they had arrived at and saw no reason to question. Above them, the city's lights broke the dark into pieces. Somewhere nearby, someone was laughing. A cab turned the corner. The air had the particular quality of a night that doesn't feel like it needs to be anywhere else. Celeste walked beside him and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately account for, the absence of the thing she had been carrying. Not the absence of all difficulty, not the resolution of every wound, not the sudden wholeness that stories sometimes promised and life rarely delivered. Just the specific, quiet, extraordinarily ordinary feeling of walking next to someone who was not waiting for her to be different. She was not a smaller version of herself. She was not a performance. She was not a qualifier or a footnote or a compromise someone had decided to make. She was simply there. Darian was simply beside her. And Zadie, from the backseat of a different car en route to a sleepover, was probably already explaining to Gerald that mountains are the most important geological feature and that anyone who didn't understand that simply hadn't been paying attention. There are people who will tell you that love is about finding someone who completes you, as though you arrived in the world unfinished. But the people who have actually been loved well will tell you something quieter, that the best thing love can do is give you a place where you don't have to explain yourself, where you're not a project or a challenge or a compromise, where the room doesn't shift when you walk in, because the person beside you never needed you to be anything other than exactly what you already are. If you've been carrying something heavy, the weight of other people's opinions, the armor you built to survive rooms that didn't want you, you already know that no one can put it down for you. But sometimes, if you're paying attention, you find someone who makes it feel possible to try. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting, about the quiet, ordinary, extraordinary ways people find their way back to themselves. We'd love for you to be here for every one of them.